Have you ever looked at the world and wondered if being a good person is actually a liability when you're in charge? We're taught from childhood that honesty and kindness are the ultimate virtues, but history, and especially some of our oldest, most complex texts, seems to suggest a much darker reality. Today, we're diving into a fascinating intersection: the cold, calculating principles of realpolitik and how they manifest in a world defined by the sinful nature described in the Ethiopian Bible. It's a place where the stakes aren't just political, they're existential.
It's a heavy starting point, but an essential one. When we talk about the Ethiopian Bible, we're looking at a collection that includes texts like the Book of Enoch, which paints a very vivid picture of a world corrupted by fallen forces. In such a landscape, the sinful world isn't just a metaphor for being naughty, it's a description of a chaotic, often predatory environment. If you're a leader in that setting, the classic Machiavellian idea that the ends justify the means stops looking like villainy and starts looking like a survival manual. If the world is inherently broken, can a leader truly afford the luxury of pure idealism?
That's the million-dollar question. If the environment is already sinful or compromised, does a ruler have a moral obligation to be ruthless just to keep the peace? We often hear that rulers must take morally questionable actions to maintain stability. But how do you square that with the spiritual weight of a text like the Ethiopian Bible?
You square it through pragmatism. Think about it this way. If a city is on the verge of being torn apart by internal strife or external threats, forces that the Bible might describe as the work of the enemy, a leader who refuses to get their hands dirty might actually be committing a greater sin by allowing the entire society to collapse. In this context, pragmatism isn't the absence of values, it's the prioritization of the collective's survival over the leader's personal purity. It's the realization that you can't build a cathedral in a swamp without first draining the mud.
So, it's about the nature of power itself. If power is the only thing that keeps the chaos at bay, then acquiring and consolidating it becomes a sacred, albeit grim, duty. But that brings us to one of the more controversial points. Is it better to be loved or feared? In a world that is sinful and perhaps prone to betrayal, does love even hold up as a structural foundation for a kingdom?
Machiavelli's answer was that it's safer to be feared than loved if you can't be both. In the context of ancient narratives, we see this play out constantly. Love is fickle. People love you when you're giving them something, but the moment things get lean, that love evaporates. Fear, however, is anchored by the dread of punishment, which never leaves. In a sinful world, where human nature is viewed as flawed or easily led astray, fear acts as a necessary guardrail. It's the lion aspect of leadership. You need the strength of the lion to scare off the wolves, even if the sheep find the lion a bit terrifying.
It's interesting you use the lion metaphor, especially considering how central the Lion of Judah is to Ethiopian tradition. But there's a flip side to that appearances. One of the points we're looking at is that maintaining a good reputation and projecting strength can be more important than actual virtue. That feels incredibly modern, like political branding, but it's actually an ancient survival tactic, isn't it?
Absolutely. In a world where information travels through whispers and legends, what people believe about you is your true power. If people believe you are virtuous and divinely backed, they are more likely to obey. If they believe you are invincible, they won't rebel. A ruler might have to do something truly ruthless behind closed doors to prevent a war, but publicly, they must maintain the image of the just sovereign. It's a performance. The sinful world demands a mask because the raw truth of power is often too ugly for the public to digest.
I want to push back on that a bit. If a leader is constantly performing and being ruthlessly decisive, where does adaptability come in? Is there a risk of becoming a tyrant who is so focused on maintaining the mask that they lose the ability to change when the world shifts?
That's exactly where the balance of skill and fortune, what the ancients called virtu and fortuna, comes in. Success isn't just about being the strongest, it's about being the most flexible. In the Ethiopian biblical tradition, you see leaders who have to navigate shifting alliances, divine tests, and literal giants. If you're rigid, you break. Adaptability is the ability to be a fox when there are traps and a lion when there are wolves. You might have to be a saint on Tuesday and a cold strategist on Wednesday. The sinful world is unpredictable. If your moral compass is a fixed iron rod, you'll be shipwrecked the moment the wind changes.
It sounds like you're describing a very lonely existence. This realpolitik over morality approach suggests that the leader is essentially operating on a different plane of existence than the people they lead. They're balancing virtues and vices like a chemist mixing volatile compounds. Is it possible to do this without losing your soul?
That is the ultimate tension. The Ethiopian Bible doesn't shy away from the idea that the world is a battlefield. If you're a leader on a battlefield, your virtue is winning the war and protecting your people. If that requires vices like deception or preemptive strikes, then those vices are transformed by their purpose. It's a heavy burden. It suggests that the leader takes the sin of the action upon themselves so that the people can live in peace. It's a sacrificial view of power, in a weird way. You give up your chance at being a simple, good man to be a complex, effective ruler.
So, we're talking about a balance of virtues and vices. A leader might need to be ruthlessly decisive to secure stability. I'm thinking about those moments in history where a single harsh command prevented a decade of civil war. It's hard to argue with the results, but it's also terrifying to think about who gets to decide when that ruthlessness is necessary.
And that's the danger. The line between a necessary Machiavellian ruler and a common tyrant is razor thin. In a fallen world, the temptation is always to lean too far into the ruthlessness, but the core idea here is that the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, requires a different set of rules. If you play a game of chess thinking the pieces will move where they ought to go rather than where the opponent moves them, you've already lost. The Ethiopian Bible's inclusion of the struggle against complex, dark forces reinforces this. You cannot fight a spiritual or political war with nothing but good intentions.
It really makes you rethink the concept of virtue. Maybe in a world that is inherently broken, the highest virtue isn't purity, but responsibility. The responsibility to do what is required, however unpleasant, to preserve the light that remains.
I think that's a profound way to put it. It's the ends justify the means, not as an excuse for greed, but as a mandate for protection. If the end is the preservation of a people, or a faith in a hostile world, the means become the tools of that preservation. It's about being shrewd. Even the New Testament mentions being wise as serpents and innocent as doves. That's a Machiavellian balance right there. You need the serpent's intellect to navigate the sinful world, even if you keep the dove's intent in your heart.
This leads us to a bit of a chilling conclusion. If we accept that the world is sinful or fundamentally chaotic, we're essentially validating the need for power dynamics that many of us find uncomfortable. We're saying that the lion must exist because the wolves are real.
Precisely. And the Ethiopian Bible, with its deep history and its inclusion of texts that deal with the very origins of chaos and sin, provides a perfect backdrop for this. It reminds us that the struggle for order is ancient and ongoing. Leadership in this context isn't a popularity contest. It's a high-stakes guardianship. It requires a person who can look into the abyss, understand its rules, and use those rules to keep the abyss from swallowing everything.
As we wrap up, it's worth reflecting on our own world. We might not talk about fallen angels or ancient giants in our daily political discourse, but the sinful world of the Ethiopian Bible, a world of unpredictability, betrayal, and power struggles isn't that far from the headlines we see today. Perhaps the most idealistic thing we can do is to be realistic about how power actually works.
It's a sobering thought to leave our listeners with. Are we willing to accept a leader who is both loved and feared, or do we prefer the comfort of an idealist who might fail when the stakes are highest? The sinful world doesn't offer easy answers, only difficult choices. The real question is, if you were the one holding the scales, would you have the courage to be the serpent for the sake of the dove?
That's a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer, and maybe that's the point. The shadow of the sovereign is long, and it's often cast by a light we don't want to look at directly. Thank you for walking through this dark forest with me today. It's given me a lot to think about regarding the cost of stability and the true nature of leadership. To our listeners, next time you see a leader making a morally questionable call, ask yourself, are they being a tyrant, or are they just reading from the oldest survival guide in history? Until next time.